Thank you. The honourable member for Pavilion Lord Minster.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to stand today and speak on Bill 201. Especially, I take it from the point of view of someone who's been very interested in parliamentary democracy for most of my life. And I will tell you that there are a number of things about the bill that trouble me, and there are also a number of things about the proposal, but about the discussion in general, which I have to say has gotten a little off the track on a number of issues. I want to state from the outset, though, that I understand the concept that our electors are our bosses. I want to make that very clear to members on both sides of the House, because I think we all know this. The question really becomes exactly as how do they exercise that influence, and it really comes down to a debate between the delegate versus the trustee form of representation. I am an ardent supporter of the trustee form of representation. I know that the delegate form of representation is the form that is more commonly used in the United States, but in my view, and certainly in the view of most parliamentary democracies around the British Commonwealth, it is the trustee form of representation that has won out. I'm concerned that this bill will drive us towards even more short-term thinking when we consider things. And the member for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville made a good point, in that sometimes there is a requirement to take a stand on things. And those stands can sometimes be unpopular. And sometimes it takes great courage to take those stands, because it is those stands that move the social progress of our societies forward. And I would personally be very concerned that there might be less likelihood to take courageous but unpopular stands if there was a possibility of being recalled at such a low threshold, as low as 27% of the electors in some ridings, if you apply the 66% to the actual turnout in some of the ridings. You know, there's a quote from James Freeman Clark that really resonates with me, and it goes like this: politicians think about the next election. Statesmen think about the next generation. Our job in this chamber, ladies and gentlemen, is not to just think about the next election, and is certainly not to think about what will avoid getting us recalled in the middle of a term. Our job is to build this province not for the next 5 years or 10 years, but the next 50 years or 100 years, like the people whose portraits hang on the walls outside did consistently. That's our job, and we have to understand that our time here may be very finite. But indeed, our job is to think about that next generation. So I'm concerned that this legislation will in fact promote short-term rather than long-term thinking. I'm also concerned about the mechanics of this. Now, Mr. Speaker, recall is something, and we'll talk a little bit about our neighbouring province, British Columbia, that has recall, but recall is primarily an American construct. 18 of the U.S. states have recall, or rather 19 of the states in the U.S. have recall. 6 of 26 Swiss cantons have recall. It was put in place somewhere between 1846 and 1892. The thresholds are vastly different, and it has never once successfully recalled a state or Cantonese representative within the canton system in Switzerland. Now, in the United States, the experience has been a little bit different. And I give the example, and this is to me a strong argument against recall, of the city of Covina, California. In Covina, they had recall legislation for their municipal council. Now, the municipal council brought in a 6% tax increase in order to keep essential services going. There was a recall of those municipal councils. They were all recalled and replaced by a new council led in large part by the folks that ran the recall legislation. When those folks actually got into a position of government and found out what the books actually were, and found out what the cost of the essential services actually were, and that there would be 43 layoffs if they in fact went ahead and didn't go ahead with the tax increase, they went ahead and increased the taxes, but not this time by 6%, but by 8.25% because of the loss of intervening time. So you tell me how recall served the people of Covina in that situation. To me, it didn't serve them at all. You know, the mechanics of recall really run contrary to our British parliamentary system. In fact, in British Columbia in 2003, and I'm actually surprised that the honourable member from Drayton Valley, Devon, didn't sort of do some more research on this, because there's an excellent review of the British Columbia recall. It's in a 71-page report that he published in 2003, and he says on page 13, and I'll table the document tomorrow, the Select Standing Committee noted that recall is, quote, alien to our parliamentary system of government and posed special problems if it was to be integrated effectively into our legislature system. It found that the concept of recall was highly complex and required careful consideration to the practical challenges of implementing recall in British Columbia. There's some other problems with recall that this report found, and I want to go into them now. The official opposition espouses itself as a party of fiscal responsibility. Well, I can tell you that while it is perhaps a dangerous thing to put a price tag on democracy, recall is not cheap. And $5,000 per recall petition doesn't even come close to covering the cost of recall. In the same report, the first 9 petitions that were covered in the 2002, 2003, 2004 fiscal year, the 9 petitions, the Chief Electoral Officer came up with an estimate of $553,954 required to administer those 9 petitions, an average of over $60,000 per petition. So I'm sorry, the $5,000 figure is hardly cost recovery. As a fiscal conservative, you should be promoting cost recovery. This is scarcely cost recovery. Now, the other thing is, they say, well, if there's no petitions, there's no cost. Well, actually not. According to the Chief Electoral Officer of British Columbia, quote, it should be noted that although the number of recall petitions actually issued and returned affects the cost of administering the Recall and Initiative Act, Elections BC must incur recall-related costs even if no applications for recall petitions are received. The infrastructure necessary to administer the recall process must be in place at all times to ensure that Elections BC can meet the requirements of the legislation. Mr. Speaker, we have in our democratic system in this province, we have a system of recall. As the member for Calgary-Elbow says, it's called a general election. And personally, you know, the member for Old Didsbury Three Hills said that if recall in place, it would have changed the behavior of those past legislators, those legislators from past governments. Well, recall wasn't in place, but I can tell you when I meet with constituents and they specifically tell me that they have an issue, and specifically one of the most difficult issues I dealt with in the last legislature had to do with pension reform. And when I met with a group of people who were part of the pension plan of government, and they told me how it would affect their lives, I did change my mind, and I went to our government and I said, we have to pull this bill. Because it's just not fair to people who are in the middle, who have been counting on a certain set of rules, that we change the rules in the middle of the game. And I was very grateful that our Minister of Finance decided to withdraw those changes that were proposed to the pension system. Now, I'm not pretending I had a lot to do with that. I'm sure I had a lot of colleagues that said the same thing. But recall wasn't going to change how I approached that problem. Now, I do want to say, Mr. Speaker, however, that I'm a little bit frustrated with some of the speakers who have spoken against this, who have tried to drag in things like backdoor financing through corporations, who have tried to state that this is some attempt to do a do-over. I don't honestly think that that's the case here. This has long been part of the policy of the party that's in the official opposition and its forerunner, the Reform Party of Canada. Now, as I said, and the Social Credit Party, for that matter, going back to the 30s. As I said, Mr. Speaker, I'm a big believer in the trustee system. I believe that the trustee system of representation serves us well, but above all, I'm a big believer in long-term thinking. And I don't believe that recall legislation serves us. I don't believe that an American style, an American construct serves us. Just look what's going on in the United States right now, and that's all the proof you need. We are a British parliamentary system. Today is Commonwealth Day, and this is not the time to bring in an American construct to make us more American in this country. Indeed, we should be proud of our heritage and stay where we are, and therefore I reject Bill 201.